Is answer to the question, why do people, religious, political, uh, atheist, anti-theist, whatever identity they might appropriate unto themselves, whether they're Gen Zer, Gen Xer, yuppie, hippie, millennial, boomer, whatever, uh, why do they want to catch us? For example, as a pastor in a local church here in Jacksonville, Arkansas, a town that's very diverse and numerous denominations, theistic traditions are here. So, what is it that betrays everyone, regardless of their color, creed, nationality, denominationality, or their theistic identity, or their social identity, cultural or political affiliation? What is it that unmasks all of them? Well, it's the want to catch you spirit and attitude. Here's why. Uh, for example, why people want to catch me. We've had people come here just layered in negligence. They were never taught, never discipled. They never grew up, and they found no interest being served for them by growing in grace and knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Matter of fact, let me read a text, and it's our 2020 lesson, Luke 20, verse 20. And I'll back up for just a moment. They were talking about the chief priests and scribes the same hour sought to lay hands on him, and they feared the people, for they perceived that he had spoken this parable against him, or against them. So if you think what I'm saying is against you, you are correct. So back to this, he was talking about the stone which the builders rejected had become the head of the corner. Well, then it says they watched him and sent forth spies. Now, this word here refers to those who are willingly, deliberately lurking about. But notice what it says, which should feign themselves just men. Feign means to fake, pretend, and it's from the word hypocrisy. So act and feign and pretend yourself a just man, that they might take hold of his word, so that they might deliver him unto the power and authority of the governor. We've had tattlers come here because they come from a different church, for example. And I know that there's a lot of effort today to go out and make new disciples rather than just wallow around with the, we'll say, old disciples who really were more better described as old wine bags. And it's impossible to put new wine in old bags because the bag will break and the new wine will spill. So if you find someone that seems to be admired for their fixity on particular things that are nowhere written, that only can feign themselves just, and then in the name of, well, I'm just concerned, and they just want to catch you. And here's why, because they were caught. So here's just a good little principle. Those who were caught, catch. That's all they can do. And for example, then here on the other side of the coin, let's just use this parallel. But those who were taught, we teach. There. So people have come here and said, "Oh, I'm from so and so missionary Baptist church," for example, or they come from First Baptist Church, or they come from Second, or from Faith Missionary Baptist Church, whatever it is. Or they're an independent Baptist, they'll say, or they're a Southern Baptist, they say, or they're of the Baptist Missionary Association, or even some who come here and say they're the American Baptist Association. So they come here and you're like, oh, great, they'll help us teach. For example, as a father, for example, I've never caught my children. I've always taught my children. My children don't run from me. They're not afraid of me. They don't cower in shame and fear should I approach them. Uh, I help them accomplish things they never wanted to do, and I would teach them what the Bible said, that you don't have to want to do this to do it. Just make sure you do the right thing first. That's from the lesson of Jesus about the two sons, one who said he didn't want to do it, later changed his mind. He didn't change his will. And then he went and did it. And then the other said, sure, I'll do it. But he never did. And Jesus asked, who did the Father's will? Well, the Son who resigned his will and ignored his own will. It didn't say he changed his will. There's a religious notion out there that we have to have a new want to, a new will. But it says he changed his mind. That's metanoia. And it didn't say he changed his will. In spite of what he wanted to do otherwise, he minded after what he knew was right, which was to do his Father's will. So my sons know that. For example, they didn't want to pursue higher education after high school. That is, didn't want to. So I told them they didn't have to want to go to college or to want to attend college or university studies. Just make sure you don't miss class. So they each have 3 degrees now, jobs of great responsibility. Their husbands to their wives, fathers to their children, their brothers here in the covenant. They're both ordained pastors, for example, here, working here in this church. So I don't really care what they ever want to do as long as what they do is the right thing. So that seems to be what the Bible teaches. But they never have been concerned that I would catch them. So when people would come here, which is why I hear there has been recently some criticism of a notion of we need to go out and make new disciples. Well, yeah, go out and disciple all the nations. Because I tell people to come here, I'm good. You don't need to teach me. I appreciate it, but I told them that if you attended the Missionary Baptist Seminary like I did, just in your first semester, you will study more Bible than most people in the world even knew was there to be known. So, and I did complete a little bit more than 1 semester. So with that in mind, I was trying to help people because it's exasperating. We have people actually would want to avoid our fellowship because the people that would creep in among us, literally, deliberately, to catch us, were just not worth it. These people are like, we've got lives, we're very productive people, we're industrious, we're educated, we're able to work, we're able to use our hands, we can acquire property, we can sell property, we can buy, we can sell, we can engage in commerce. We can be employed. We have certified teachers here. We have brilliant people. So why would they want to come in among us to catch us? Well, they were caught. That's why we can't begrudge them. It's if you were under some religious order and some tradition where rather than teach, you went out to catch, it's because you were caught yourself. So that's let's say, perfect tense. Those having been caught are presently continuously catching others, you see. But those of us who have been taught are presently continuously teaching. For example, controversies about ordinances, controversies about baptism. We had people want to catch us not standing inside the baptistry, but in their ignorance, they didn't notice we were inside a building. So if they were concerned about me standing inside or not inside the baptistry, they seem to be oblivious to the fact we were inside a building. You'd think they'd say, let's go outside, let's go out to a lake or a pond where they wouldn't have to worry if I stood inside. I would have to enter the waters, into the river or into the creek and do it scripturally. But since they were okay with us baptizing with water indoors, it was funny for them to then try to catch me. Well, I don't stand in the water. I don't have to. I don't have to physically lower someone in the water. I can stand there with my hand as I do, and I don't care to be caught by people who don't know what they're talking about. So what it is that would make these people do this? They said, well, they want to take hold of his words and go deliver. They tattle, and I laughed Sunday in our 2020 service because I count on tattlers to go out and spread the word. But it's striking that these disciples, these caught disciples, not the taught ones, all they do is come here to catch. So I asked some people, one person concerned about baptism, I said, well, have you taught anyone about baptism, how it's our way out, Exodus, book of Exodus, EX, out from, Odos way, and that they were all baptized into Moses, we're all baptized into Christ? Have you taught anybody that? Did you teach anyone the implication of being baptized into Christ? That is, this assembly that's limited and defined by Christ? Did you? No, they don't teach anyone. Then there was concerns about the Lord's Supper. One man came here and he wanted to catch me not saying or saying the wrong thing in the pulpit. So I assumed Remember, I was very naive. I thought if you were a Baptist and you came here, that you came here to help us teach people. Well, when I asked him, he was carrying his John MacArthur study Bible under his arm. It was really cute to me that he didn't mind studying someone who advocated Reformed theology, supported John Calvin, who I think that's great. I mean, I like Joe Namath as a football player, and I even have a jersey with his name on it, autographed picture of him in the New York Jets when he played there. I've got a collector's card of him from college and professional. So him liking John MacArthur is okay, and John MacArthur liking John Calvin. It's just John Calvin hated covenant communities, the people who had believed the gospel and were baptized and were covenant together in that elect body that had been called out and were there serving and faithful to the ordinances of Christ and carrying out the Great Commission. So, as novel and cute as it was, him holding his John MacArthur study Bible, which was okay with me, I wasn't here to catch him, I was here to teach him. He could never tell me, well, what should I be saying? Because I would admonish the members in the fellowship to assure that they had prepared themselves, which is what we were taught. Now, that's back in the 80s, early 80s, where the membership would examine ourselves and then self-correct, reconcile, work things out with each other. But apparently that had gone to the wayside. And in his mind, the only objective now was, regardless of the congregation, which had, at that time when I came here to Landmark, they were deliberately divided. The deacons were deliberately divided, both sides being rewarded by their people they could get to go along with them. That's really just people who were caught, you know. So when people try to catch me in the division over the new land or the old land, I just ask what any godly man that was entrusted the stewardship of the Lord's church, who's done the cost-benefit analysis between the 2.5-acre traditional plant site and the 10-acre future site. They didn't even know the liability for developing the 10-acre site. They didn't even know the appraised value of the 2.5-acre. But again, if you've been caught, all you want to do is catch someone, but you can't catch God's people. So he just wandered off eventually, and then we were accused of not giving someone a cup or bread. That is, a deacon was accused who happened to have the unfortunate responsibility of handing a tray. And when I asked that dear lady who caught us, she was here to catch us. Now, she didn't mind her unscrupulous business practices and improprieties with our church records and other anomalous financial maneuvers, but that's another story. So when I said, well, who said that a deacon is supposed to hand to another man's wife or a mother in the church here? Who said he's supposed to decide to extend it or withdraw it? Well, she was really confused, and she should have been. She had been caught in her past, and she was here to catch me because she wanted me to get caught up. She wanted to catch me up. So catch me. Well, then ironically, people came here from the most, well, if you hear them talk, they use things like New Light. They use things about people. They had known so many ways to observe communion: stand up, sit down, circle all around, dismiss, regather, come back at night, pick a different day. Now, I didn't blame them. It's just they wanted to now catch me up. And you know, for years, all over 14 years, they never one time talked with me directly with the Bible open about 1 Corinthians 11, 1 through 3. Now, strange enough, now think about this. People who are caught only can catch. People who are taught, we always teach. They never taught anyone, even in their own family. I would teach members of their family about the Lord's Supper. I would teach people here in the church. But we'd come to wedding rehearsals and people would just exhaust ourselves, you know, making sure when do you light the candle, when do you pour the sand if you're having a unity candle, or if you pour the sand, you pour the blue, you pour the pink, you pour the blue, you pour the pink, and then you have this beautiful nomenclature of a blended together forever in this sand container vessel. Or one of the most beautiful weddings I was ever in, a crystal heart, and I would place the one of the fixtures that went into it, and I would explain how the two came together and made one heart. And that's actually in the Hebrew language from the letter Lamed. If you invert and have them face each other, it forms heart. But what I was saying is it was striking that so much detail. We had one wedding years and years and years ago. The young lady brought a manuscript, a transcript of every detail, and had her family in a huge circle. But no one ever, what I learned as a first-generation Christian and as someone who only became a Baptist in 1987, they never had rehearsal one time for the Lord's Supper. They didn't include 1 Corinthians 11. They didn't include the husband and the wife, the father and the children. They didn't include the brothers. They didn't include a woman who should have examined herself, and is she in the faith as a sister to a sister? Is she in the faith as a wife to her husband, submitting herself to him? Is she in the faith as the mother of her children? Is she raising them in nurture and admonition of the Lord? Is the man examining himself? Is he in the faith as a father to his children who's not raging alongside, exasperating them, but rather nurturing and fostering them in the admonition of the Lord? Is he someone who is a husband to her, submitting himself to her, willingly dying for her like Christ did for the church? Is he a brother in the covenant, teaching and helping iron sharpen iron? Well, no, he was just a dirt clod carrying a MacArthur study Bible, wanting to tell the pastor who knew more Bible and I could give up my life for the next 100 lifetimes, and he could never even come close because he's never been taught. He was only here to catch me, and I appreciate that. I did. It's just I hate it for them because it came in. What they did, they brought in what doesn't belong in the Lord's church. So I asked when I taught them about the Great Commission, I said, I wrote my master's thesis on the Great Commission and about disciple making, and it's an ongoing process, and how we grow in grace and knowledge, how we develop, how there's younger ones among us, there's stronger ones among us, there's weaker ones among us. I said, you do understand all this can get messy if we don't sit down and every one of us are teaching and modeling the behavior by our conduct and as well as by our doctrine. But it was interesting. But they asked him, saying, Master, we know that thou sayest and teachest rightly, neither acceptest thou the person of any, but teachest the way of God. Now, when someone tells me that I'm teaching rightly, I have to assume that they must know a lot about the Bible to know if I, who know a lot about the Bible, am teaching rightly. Well, we know that's a pretense. They're just saying what they think is right. So people go, I never said that Landmark Missionary Baptist Church was heretical. I just said that I caught them X, Y, Z. Now, remember, they don't teach. So if you have people encroach your fellowship, and we did here just all the time, especially if they come from something less than one of the Lord's New Testament churches, churches that don't recognize that God is the head of Christ, Christ the head of every man, and that the husband is the head of the wife, and the children are to obey the parents. So if you take that out of the church letters, if you take that out of the church where Christ isn't the head of the church and the church is not someone that's so submitted to Christ and his teachings that a pastor like myself during the wedding service, I can point to the church here, Landmark Missionary Baptist Church, that faithfully and fully gathers together here at 2200 Marshall Road, and told my own sons in their wedding services, now you love your wife like Christ loved Landmark and gave his life for her. And I would tell the women standing there, the woman that will soon be his wife, I would tell her, now you submit yourself to your husband as you notice Landmark Baptist Church submit herself to Christ. But people come here to deliberately not submit. So how do people that have been here for decades and claim that all this is important, and yet they've never, with an open Bible, sat down? We've never even had a rehearsal. We've never had people even want to be careful. Some just show up and like, oh, it's Communion Sunday? Oh, yeah. Okay, don't worry about it. Let's just make sure somebody that shouldn't receive a cup doesn't get a cup so that we can say that we didn't get caught letting someone have a cup. Well, we never let anyone have a cup. I've always been faithful to assure that my wife receives a cup of bread. My sons, likewise, all the heads of the households here, all of our deacons are heads of their households. And when a decision is made, a judgment in a household, that's on the father of the household. And when we have unattended ladies, for example, then Someone who's a son to her will entreat her as a mother. Someone who's a brother to her will entreat her as a sister. So really, if you teach the Lord's Supper, then people become more aware of the content and the implication of it. We had a couple in our church celebrate their 75th wedding anniversary, and at the same time, one of their children was celebrating their 50th anniversary. And what struck me, again, I'm a first generation Christian. I don't know the old paths of the neo-Baptists that are out there. And so I would hear people talk about how remarkable that was. But they never made attribution to the gospel, to baptism, the testimony of Christ that was conferred for them to bear. They never talked about the implication of baptism, like the Bible said, that when John the Baptist baptized people, they'd say, well, now what is this? What's the implication for us? And he would tell soldiers to not receive wages, to go out and falsify charges against someone and do violence against people. He told tax collectors who said, now that we're baptized, John, what do you expect from us? And he said, well, don't take more money than what's owed you. And others, well, what of us? Well, what about us? He said, well, if you have two garments and someone doesn't have one, then make sure they have that. And then he said, if you have more than enough meat, then someone who doesn't have it, you give to them. So he was teaching them how to extend the grace and go out and teach and reach, not catch, which I just find it charming that people were driven to come here to catch me. And then when the internet came, it was really strange because they'd see something on the internet or hear something on their TV by one of those religious talking heads. So I've been caught not supporting the wrong side of a bad argument or the right side of a bad argument so many times. But you have to remember they were caught. And in their humiliation and degradation, they wanted to go out. Now, if you look at their families, you'll find out their children want nothing to do with it. They flee. We have people here whose children will not even participate in the faith in which they claim themselves to be advocates. They don't want any part of it. They stay as far away from it as they can. Young people don't want to be somewhere where the people are not there to teach them, but rather catch them. And I don't blame them. I was never caught by my father, and I never lived in dread. What if he catches me? Our relationship was a father-son relationship. My honor for him was the right thing to do. Often I did my duty when I didn't want to. I did what was right when I didn't want to. That always gave him honor and glory, and he was thankful that I would obey him first. And he taught me, like I taught my sons, I don't need you to want to mow the yard. Just make sure it gets done in time. And I don't need you to want to do your chores. Just make sure. And I remember him explaining to me how far I would go in life if I would learn to do what's right, regardless of how I felt about it. If I would learn and accept the discipline and receive the teaching. So I did. So sometimes under the most onerous circumstances, some of the most duress situations, still do what's right. So at Landmark Baptist Church, I correctly taught people about the Lord's Supper, how men should present themselves to the Lord's table as fathers to their children, husbands to their wives, and brothers in the covenant. Correctly taught women how to present themselves to the Lord's table. That is, their husbands applied that teaching in an instructive manner, and I did it in a very informative manner. I do not directly instruct another man's wife. I do not discipline another man's children. I do teach and admonish the man, and that's what we do. And that's probably why it was so disappointing for people who only know what it's like to be caught, then go out and catch people. Because when I asked them, I said, well, who are you discipling? Which is to teach. So if you just want to catch God's disciples, you'll need to really be prepared because you might be quite humiliated and embarrassed by how smart Jesus' students are. And you might be surprised at how you might come to the point like this says. It says, and they asked him, saying, Master, we know thou teachest rightly, neither acceptest any of the person. He said, is it lawful for us to give tribute unto Caesar or not? But he perceived their craftiness. So I noticed people's craftiness. Like I said, if you're carrying one of them, I'll use a compound app, big old MacArthur study Bibles, and you coming up to me in one of the Lord's churches, a covenant community, and I'm the pastor, and I'm overseeing the flock, and I'm teaching, and I'm training, and I'm disciple making, and I'm equipping the saints. perfecting them unto the work, and I'm doing all these things that all of God's elect do. And here I am doing that, and you're toting your big old MacArthur Study Bible, and you're trying to catch me, then I know it's just craftiness. Or if you're in the same group as a little group formed in our church, and out of one side of their mouth they were saying we were closed communion, and out of the other side of their mouth they were saying we were open communion, and out of the other side of their mouth they were both saying we just don't like it. Well, they were women who didn't want to be led by a husband. They were husbands who didn't want to be the head of the wife. They were men who didn't want to be a brother of the covenant, and they presumed that they could enter the Lord's house and present themselves to his table and mock his table. But I reminded them, my son didn't die for Landmark Baptist Church. The Son of God died and bought Landmark Missionary Baptist Church with his own blood. So those who want to walk in and presumptively speak and bring their culture of the world into the Lord's church is because they were caught. The world caught them, so they want to then today catch us, and they want to pass that on. But look what it says. They want to catch him, but it's craftiness. He said, why are you tempting me, trying me out? As I tell people all the time, I'm good. I've had so many pastors teach me that, oh my, I don't even know how many pastors have taught me in the years and decades I've been in the seminary, and then school after seminary, and then went back to seminary 10 years later to graduate school, and then went at night, and then went to another seminary and distance, and then went and took graduate courses in another field entirely, and then I'm at another seminary, Louisiana Baptist University, and working on a PhD in a field of biblical counseling, which is based on nouthetic counseling, which was advocated in the Missionary Baptist Seminary. So, oh my, but I appreciate it being tried out by people who could not even have enough knowledge to convene a jury. But we just live with that. And that's why I say if you're not initiating student-teacher relationships with people by preaching the gospel and then baptizing them, you'll find something very strange and odd about people who just want to be fixated. Now, they'll take their dog to a vet. They'll take their child to a dentist. They'll go to a hospital. They'll send their children to educational institutions of higher learning. They'll expect fire and police protection. But when it comes to the Bible, they'll just ignore. They don't want to be taught. They don't teach because they were caught. They want to catch. But you can't catch God's people. Let's see why. He says, show me a penny whose image and subscription hath it. They answered and said, Caesar's. He said to them, render therefore unto Caesar the things which be Caesar's, and unto God the things which be God's. So I've had charming people. I was accused of being a Calvinist after our Calvinists left the church, but I didn't know how that was an accusation because they couldn't articulate which feature of Calvinism was the wrong feature that I was supposedly accused of advocating. So when I asked them, were they speaking of the hyper form, or were they speaking of the 2-point, 3-point, 1-point more? Were they teaching of the moderate form? Were they talking about supra-lapsarianism? They said super. How ignorant. But you got to remember, they were caught. So all they can do is try to catch. So then I had to help them realize that they had not even formulated their accusation. And they didn't know that regeneration doesn't precede faith, and it follows the finite verb believe, and it antedates, precedes the present active participle, but they didn't know the difference. But then I told them neither do the Calvinists. So run along now. So that's what they did. And they really need to take that somewhere else, because in the Lord's church, why shouldn't we enjoy the absolute knowledge of the truth in such a way that you at least want that kind of knowledge for your dog? I never heard of taking a dog to a veterinarian when I was growing up. Now, I'm not against it. It's just strange that if you were to believe your dog needs that kind of care, then why don't you support your child needing the best doctrinal teaching and instruction that's out there? Why wouldn't you say, I want my child to be in one of the Lord's New Covenant churches? Well, if you say that, you'll be caught, and they'll try to catch you, and they'll begin to pressure you because what are you saying about our church? And see, Christians never say that. Christians never say Landmark Missionary Baptist Church as a called out body of God's elect and covenant together and baptized and blood bought and Beulah land bound and all the other wonderful descriptors you want who come together under the headship of Christ. We'll never say we're a church too. We'll never say we teach the gospel too. We'll never say, well, this is how we do the Lord's Supper. No, we'll say, you go read in 1 Corinthians 11 and read how Paul admonished them, admired them for the ordinances, then how he told them to imitate, follow Christ the way he does, which I tell men here, you need to start following Jesus the way Brother Carter does. You need to bother to study, bother to show yourself approved, bother to present yourself to the Lord, bother to hold fast your profession of faith, bother to show an implication of baptism that corresponds to the implications taught in the Bible, bother to give attribution to the Lord's Supper and your faithful observance of that, and show that this is making a difference in my life. Because if it doesn't make a difference in your life, what are you doing? You're saying you can, in remembrance of Christ, eat the Lord's Supper and it hold no implication for your life? And that's why we do it on Sunday morning so our visitors and guests can watch. And someone said, well, what do you do about the visitors and guests? I said, the same thing we do when we baptize. We give them something to watch. They can watch us because they can't know what we're doing. We've never had anyone ask, well, what are we going to do about the guests and the visitors during the wedding service, Brother Carter? What are we going to do about the guests and visitors during the funeral service? You know, we've never yet to date, for example, at a military funeral, I've never yet to date seen someone stand up and take one of the 7 guns in the 21-gun salute and say, I brought my own. No one's ever disrupted. I never saw them when those people who knew when to do what they were there to do and those who had prepared before that special funeral. I never saw someone folding a flag and someone jump up and, hey, I wanted to do that. No, we've never had anyone during a communion service where the heads of the households, the fathers of their children, the husbands of their wives, and brothers in the covenant, they know what they're to do. So by the time I get up in the pulpit to give the lesson of Christ, as we, in remembrance of him, obey his request to remember him, and we do that, and I teach the implication of that, well, the men have already taken care of their own families, and young men have taken care of the responsibility they have to entreat a lady in our church like a mother. So anyway, whatever people are talking about. So now we, like everything else, well, let's see what happens. Well, they can't take hold of our words. But why do they want to catch our words? They don't want to be taught. They don't teach, but they're sitting here trying to catch us who've not been caught. Jesus didn't catch me. Jesus came to seek and to find me. I didn't come out from the world to walk in here so that people who are still in or of the world could crawl into here in the Lord's church and presume they're going to take issue with us and catch us. Why, they'll watch something on the internet and come in here, and one of them was trying to teach something about the age of the earth, and that's a number. Then I found out he wasn't interested in the age of the earth because he didn't know anything about the numbers in the Bible. He didn't know how to even begin to calculate and determine that. He had never studied time. He didn't consider the literal nature of a man works 6 days and rest on the 7th. That was 12-hour days, even though Jesus said there's 12 hours in the day. He kept saying 24. I said, you've never worked 6 24-hour days. I said, I've come close, but I know you probably don't even know what I'm talking about. So the point I was getting at is they had no interest in even the Bible doctrine of time. They didn't care about Psalm 90. They didn't care about 1 Peter. They didn't care about Genesis 1. They didn't care about instantaneity. They didn't care about the immutability of God. They didn't care about the impeccability of Christ. They didn't care about the hypostatic union between Christ and God. They didn't care about the Godhead. They didn't care about the kenosis of Christ, how he emptied himself. And when it's done with, I'm like, so you just crept in here, having been caught yourself, you want to catch somebody here. But you can't catch someone who knows the Bible. And I don't know what it must be like to have to feign yourself a just person long enough to catch us. But I do like it when people come here to catch us because I pity them, because I know they must have had a father that was out to catch them. And they probably had to lurk and hide and go off in dark places. Like the Bible says, they wouldn't come to the light because their deeds are evil. Well, they saw what their father did. As Jesus said, you're just doing what you saw your father do. Now, in earthly terms, I do what I saw my father do. He took responsibilities more than were his. He bore reproaches that didn't belong to him. He accepted blame. I was so well taught by my father that in some meetings in organizations, I'd raise my hand at the beginning and just tell them to go ahead and blame me, and they'd say, why? I said, well, then we can get on with working toward a solution. Because it seemed that people who didn't want to get caught didn't know much about their operation. So whether I was in manufacturing, whether I was in direct sales, whether I was in manufacturing of ammunition, manufacturing of industrial lubrications. Uh, it's just so many people that had no idea how to teach the subject matter because they'd never been taught it. They were never a learner. So in the world, they get called a lot and they want to go catch people. And I'm just so bored with that because there's so many good things and there's a great life out there. So the people in our society that God has placed for the purpose of advancing knowledge, I enjoy that. It's similar to, I knew men who called themselves Masons. And the ones who were really Masons had nothing to do with them. But the wannabes who were like the decals, they tried to catch me too. It was almost funny because they were wanting me to endorse the Masonic Lodge or to condemn the Masonic Lodge, and they wanted to know where I stood. I said, well, first, there's no such thing as a Mason demanding someone to endorse or condemn so that they might catch me giving the wrong answer. And then they thought because they were pressuring me, a Mason doesn't pressure someone to go along with Masonry. So when they learned that I had been trained by Masons since I was 8 years old, operatives, not the speculatives, and I'm talking about functional, not the social, I was taught to train and use my knowledge to improve the condition of others. I was trained to improve the condition of another person through teaching, and I was taught that that was my responsibility as a good citizen, and that's why I can never be part of the social Masonic Lodge. But I can assure you that today there's still no such thing as someone, even in the Masonic Lodge, demanding that someone endorse it or suffer the consequences of being accused of renouncing it. So that's all. None of that is effective. And if you knew who the true and living God was as revealed through Jesus Christ, you wouldn't concern yourself with what people who want to catch you are accomplishing by having presumed to have done so. And when people go tattle about Landmark, they're not new disciples. They certainly don't have a new mind. They don't have a new heart. They don't have a new spirit. They've never been transformed by the renovation of their minds. And like I said, they might think it's okay to tote around a big old John MacArthur study Bible and try to instruct a man that could take John MacArthur to school. Now, I wouldn't mind teaching Johnny MacArthur. Wouldn't mind at all, but I don't go around trying to catch him. I've had to deal with things he said that aren't in the Bible that distress people in the congregation, and I would have the honor of correcting it to show them where something was omitted, that wasn't the meaning of the word, or that he omitted the kind of action that's emphasized in Koine Greek. I've had to deal with someone named Dr. Michael Brown who goes out saying things, but why are people that come here listening to that? And then I have to then go and say, oh no, you don't keep your salvation, you don't live your life trying not to lose your salvation. The Bible says we are ones who, having been kept, are always being kept in Christ Jesus. I said, there's no such thing as a good shepherd having a sheep who would in any way destroy himself, participate in the results of his own actions, and there's no way that one of his sheep would suffer being plucked out from his hand by even any kind of wolf, and there's no such thing as one of his own ever knowing what it is to thirst again, and we'll never know what it is to die. Jesus did die to death beyond all men. So I don't know what this is about except to help you. I'll leave off with this, but people who want to catch you were caught. They were never taught, because when I asked them, what are you talking about? Again, even the silliness about free will, people brought that here, and they thought they were trying to catch me as someone who didn't support free will, but I asked which one were they advocating before I could find myself engaged in the conversation, because you want to first understand before you seek to be understood, and I was taught that in companies by very smart, brilliant minds who were in charge of great responsibilities of work and resources. So then they were flabbergasted because they didn't even know which free will it was that they were feigning themselves to believe and advocate. So I knew then that, as I said to them, if you don't even care enough about the subject you're pretending to care about, but you're so anxious to catch me on the wrong side of that about which you don't even know, and then I asked them, are they talking about the bound will that Martin Luther, the bondage of the will? I don't know. The parable of the two sons dispelled that. my wills, plural, of both the mind and the flesh, I really don't know. The Bible said that there was a time, though, where that's all I did was fulfill those. It doesn't say anything's done away with those. It doesn't say anything about those have been freed. It says I no longer fulfill those. I still have the wills, plural, of both my mind and my flesh. But you won't find anybody who knows that. So, again, they were so anxious to catch, and then they want to catch me in open or closed theism, and I remind them the Bible says living theism. They want to catch me in open, closed, strict, restricted communion services. So I taught them what the Bible said. They want to catch me in all types of things. But again, you have to have great pity for these people. I mean, Jesus, knowing that the children of Jerusalem would be destroyed within 40 years, lamented over Jerusalem, saying how often he would have gladly gathered their children like a hen gathers her chicks. And he lamented that. So I don't take joy in watching people on the broad way of destruction. I pray for their children because I think, my goodness, if they'll do this to me, someone that is walking uprightly, someone that has been taught, someone that has walked away from multiple careers to give his life to the service of Christ, to encourage people to present themselves at the Lord's table. If since to these people, nothing in the gospel, nothing in baptism, nothing in the Lord's Supper, nothing in faithfully assembling, nothing in disciple making holds any implication, then you know what their domestic life is like. Because I'll end on this, but the funniest thing that ever happened to me was I was in the Lord's church and they started singing a song, God Give Us Christian Homes. So I stood up afterward and said, well, if you all don't have Christian homes, who does? Because it's presupposed that the Lord's church is comprised of families whose homes are of the faith, and that we come together as families, and we come together and walk the way. Because I've seen their church directory from here at Landmark, for example, back in the 70s, and beneath the picture of a family there, it would be Mr. and Mrs. John Smith, for example. It didn't say Skip, Buffy, Jody, and Junior. So they were all identified under the head of their home. So I knew that they had known how to observe and present themselves at the Lord's table. I knew that the older ones here and myself, much older in years than my years, and much wiser than my years because of these good people who helped teach me. But it was funny, after they went and enjoyed their homegoing with the Lord, and the saints left our church, and the neo saints crawled in from different places. All they want to do is catch. Well, then I realized, well, you can't teach. So you were never taught, so all you were was caught, and all you can do is try to catch. And I tell you what, there's some children and families out there suffering greatly in households where all they do is seek to catch each other. In households where I've counseled a lot of people, and I've engaged people. I said, who's after you? Especially in marital counseling, where the one that breaks the covenant is a bad, unjust steward, and all these things, they begin to demonize the faithful one. So I stopped them right there. I said, well, your faithful spouse wasn't trying to catch you. That's not part of marriage, to try to catch your spouse. You're not supposed to be unequally yoked. And so when they come here from different kinds of religions and so-called churches, and all they did in their fellowship was try to catch each other, I know then that they have no idea what a covenant is, to live with the interest of other people. They don't know what it is to receive teaching. So, yes, when I hear of people today seeking out new disciples and going out to initiate new student-teacher relationships and reach people that have not been reached, I definitely understand why. Because I could receive a new employee, for example, into a company, train them in 6 months to get more done in a week than people who claim to have been there for decades. Because all they were doing was just trying to get by and not be caught. Trying to get by and not be caught. And I would just tell them, as I tell the Lord's church, I'm not here to catch anybody. I'm here to teach. So you have a good day and enjoy the lesson. Luke 20:20. Enjoy your new year.